Let me start with the sentence that quietly shaped many lives without ever being questioned. Why can't you be more like them? For some children, this wasn't an occasional comment. It was the framework they grew up inside. They weren't simply noticed less. They were constantly positioned next to a sibling, beside a cousin, compared to a classmate, or measured against an imagined version of themselves that never existed. Love didn't disappear, but it became conditional. Attention shifted. Approval moved, and the child learned something subtle but powerful. Value is relative. When childhood ends, that lesson doesn't dissolve. It relocates. The child who was always compared becomes an adult who carries an invisible scoreboard into every room, into friendships, into relationships, into work, even into rest. Comparison didn't just teach them how to perform. It taught them how to relate. In friendships, this often shows up as usefulness. They become the listener, the dependable one, the person who remembers details, shows up consistently, and asks little in return. They give generously, not because they don't have needs, but because they learned early that contribution equals belonging. Beneath that generosity sits a quiet fear that never fully rests. If I stop being valuable, will I still matter? They're often described as strong, easygoing, low maintenance. And while that admiration sounds positive, it comes with an unspoken cost. Being admired is not the same as being known. Being relied on is not the same as being chosen. In romantic relationships, comparison becomes internal surveillance. They may struggle to believe they are loved for who they are rather than what they offer. Affection feels fragile even when it isn't. Silence feels loaded. Distance feels like danger. They measure themselves against past partners, imagined rivals, unrealistic standards. Not because their partner is unsafe, but because their nervous system learned early that connection can be withdrawn without warning. So the heart stays alert, even in moments meant for closeness. At work, the pattern intensifies. Effort is no longer driven by curiosity or passion, but by fear. Fear of being average. Fear of being outpaced. Fear of becoming invisible. Accomplishments bring relief, not fulfillment. Relief is simply the absence of threat. It fades quickly. The mind moves immediately to the next benchmark. Rest feels uncomfortable because comparison never rests. Someone else is always moving forward, at least in imagination. This creates a specific kind of exhaustion, not physical, existential. The fatigue of constantly running without knowing what you're trying to outrun. And here's the paradox. Many people who grew up compared are highly capable. They are perceptive, adaptable, emotionally intelligent. But these strengths were shaped under pressure, which means they come with tension. Decision-making becomes heavy. Every choice feels like evaluation. What if this isn't impressive enough? What if someone else chooses better? What if this lowers my value? So they hesitate. They overthink. They seek reassurance. When worth is tied to outcome, every decision feels like judgment. Failure becomes complicated. Some fear it intensely. Others expect it. Some unconsciously pull back just as success approaches. Not because they won't fail, but because success brings visibility. And visibility feels dangerous to someone who learned early that being seen meant being evaluated. Failing early feels safer than being judged later. This isn't self-sabotage. It's outdated self-protection. Another quiet consequence of constant comparison is the erosion of internal motivation. When a child grows up focused on outperforming others, they lose access to desire. They become skilled at achieving, but disconnected from wanting. As adults, they may succeed in paths they never chose. They may look accomplished and still feel empty, because fulfillment doesn't come from performance. It comes from alignment, and alignment requires self-connection. The very thing comparison interrupts. Healing does not begin with confidence. It begins with curiosity. Curiosity about questions that were never safe to ask before. What do I actually enjoy? What feels meaningful to me? What matters when no one is watching? At first, these questions feel uncomfortable. There is no scoreboard, no immediate feedback, just presence. And presence can feel unfamiliar to someone raised on evaluation. Another essential step is noticing the measuring reflex, that automatic scan when you enter a room. Who seems more successful? Who seems more confident? Who feels ahead? This reflex is not a flaw. It is a learned survival pattern. And patterns can be observed without being obeyed. You can notice comparison without following it. You can name it as old conditioning and gently return to yourself. The body is involved in this process too. Comparison doesn't live only in thoughts. It lives in tension. The tight jaw, the lifted shoulders, the shallow breath. These are signs of vigilance. Learning to relax is not laziness. It is relearning safety. This is why calm can feel unsettling. Chaos feels familiar. Calm feels suspicious. But calm is where repair happens. Healing also requires redefining success, not as superiority, but as alignment. Success becomes work that feels meaningful, even if no one applauds. Relationships that feel mutual, not performative. Rest without guilt. This redefinition goes against conditioning, which is exactly why it matters. Grief often surfaces here. Grief for the child who had to earn love, for the version of you that never got to simply exist. This grief doesn't mean you're regressing. It means you're integrating. One of the most powerful shifts occurs when the question changes. Not am I better than them, but am I being honest with myself? Honesty builds self-trust, and self-trust dissolves comparison. When you trust yourself, validation becomes optional. You choose based on values, not fear. Relationships change as well. You allow yourself to be seen without performing. You ask for help without feeling smaller. You set boundaries without over-explaining. At first, this feels unfamiliar. Then it feels freeing. Self-compassion becomes essential. Many people who were compared speak to themselves with inherited harshness. That voice was learned, not chosen. Softening it isn't indulgent. It's corrective. You are allowed to exist without being exceptional. And then something quietly profound happens. You realize comparison didn't steal your ability. It stole your time. Time spent scanning. Time spent proving. Time spent doubting. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about reclaiming that time internally. Moving at your own pace. Letting your life unfold without constant measurement. The child who grew up compared learned how to survive evaluation. The adult they become can learn how to live without it. Not perfectly, not all at once, but gradually. And one day, without noticing when it changed, the inner question softens. It is no longer, am I enough compared to others? It becomes, am I being true to myself today? And that question doesn't compete. It doesn't rank. It doesn't threaten. It simply guides.